let me tell you a couple of variants on the reading the highest value thing.
Okay.
Number one, in Sorcerer, there is a relatively blunt, if mathematically viable, but perhaps a little too labor-intensive way of handling ties, which is, as you mentioned in your text, just clip out the two highest tying dice, two tying dice, and then see what you have.
Right.
Now, Heavy Gear did this differently back in the 90s. And Raphael Chandler's game, which is now called Pandemonio, but was originally called Dread before Jenga came along, was it also did the same thing. It used D12s, but in Heavy Gear used D6s. What they did was that you said you rolled, and if you got ties in your roll, in your highest value, that the additional dice were just plus ones. I really didn't want any kind of plus one, minus one parsing in Sorcerer at all.
Yeah.
So I reluctantly did not adopt that. Because in terms of ease of use, and in terms of its legitimate impact on what's going on, it's actually very, very powerful. It's easy to use, and it makes sense.
Right.
Having, double sixes is a 7. Okay. It beats your 1/6. I get that. That's fantastic. So, if you were to do that, I think you'd have a very readable way of handling your pools, which is very important for D6s especially, because D6s tie out a lot.
Yeah. I was thinking of maybe the standard die height precisely for that reason, because I was afraid they would just roll the same too much and just cancel each other out.
Right. Well, it will if you let them cancel out. So therefore, if you were to use the method I'm talking about, that would be one solution, as opposed to simply starting at a D8, which, granted, kicks the can down the road, but doesn't really solve the problem.
Yeah. So to make sure I understand, it's if you get a tie, you get a +1 for every other die that tied, or is it every die in your die pool entirely?
Every die that has that value.
Gotcha.
You look at the high value and see how many dice you got for it. It's that value +1 for every extra.
Doesn't Sorcerer do that too? Am I misremembering?
No.
Okay.
No.
I thought there was +1s in Sorcerer as well.
No. I was a purist, and like I say, it actually keeps the math cleaner. Learning the probability curves for Sorcerer actually is very nice because they don't change due to the ties.
Right.
The probability curves stay exactly the same.
Yeah.
So it's really, really nice. It's clean in terms of probability theory. It is not, however, as easy to use. And like I said, in terms of bonusness, being able to benefit more from more dice, that particular method is not flawed.
Yeah.
So that's a suggestion for thinking about just plain reading your own roll. Here's the other thing that has plagued my discussion and talk of gaming, and particularly teaching systems and mechanics for all my time. The word tie exerts a fascination that makes everybody's brain fall out. And you get like hideous subroutines of how to manage the fiction of a tie in games all over the place. And I am going to point to the text I received, the sketchbook for Origin that you sent me, as perhaps a nice case study of what I've encountered many times.
Yeah.
Because, number one, you said the attacker, has to exceed the value of the defender.
Right.
Well, that solves the problem right there.
Yeah.
There are no ties.
Right.
If the values are the same, it's not a tie, it's a failure.
Right.
In other words, are we talking about tie as a numerical phenomenon, or are we talking about tie as a result?
Right.
If you say that the numerical tie isn't a result of a tie, it's just a failure, you're fine.
Right.
Now, that's the rule for Slay With Me as well. Here's the problem. Nobody on this earth will accept that. Their brain will spot the numerical tie. They will quickly create the result of a tie. And they will tell you your game is broken or your rules suck because you didn't account for the tie.
Right.
And if you point to the text just above it that says attacker must exceed the defender's result,
right,
they say, but you're still not accounting for the tie.
Right.
And you say, you don't have to account for the tie, asshole. I just said it has to exceed the amount, otherwise it's a failure. The tie, man. Your games, you suck. You can't write a game. You're not going to beat it. I don't understand it either. But you can't beat it. And you know how I know you can't beat it? Because in your very next sentence in the Origin sketchbook, you have an elaborate subsystem for handling the tie.
Right.
Even though your very own sentence right before it said we didn't need one. So I hear you. You know, I mean, all of us are seduced by the numerical tie into insisting upon a result of a tie.
Right.
It's a curse. There's not a shred of logic in it, and logic will not save you. The reaction will be, no, you suck. Even if all it takes is ties go to the defender, that'll make people happy, even though it is profoundly redundant with what you already wrote.
Right.
But it will make them happy.
Okay.
Thank you for permitting me to vent about that.
That's definitely interesting.
So, all right. So we're starting with our D6s. Let's work it through every single step. Number one, what determines the actual number of dice rolled per person?
The ethical dimension of the action.
Got it. Number two, what affects the size of the dice?
Superpowers.
Right. And then three, now we get to the toughest one. Because you have your default target number, which is 2. And you have your opposed target number, which is other person's highest value.
Right.
Now, actually, I didn't state those quite right, because 2 or better is good. So you have to beat a 1 if you're rolling in one way, and then you have to beat the other guy's highest.
Yeah. Right. I'm thinking of changing it to 3 or better, but that's academic at this point.
That's one of those things you play with a little bit. You run it at 2 or better and see if it, if it's terrible. And
right.
But with those in mind, then we say what varies in the moment. What happens if someone comes in and assists me? Which of those changes? Or how does it interact with my result?
Right.
And you have rules for that. You also have some complicated things like what you have to do with the slam, for example.
Yeah.
You have to adjust a bunch of stuff.
Right. You do backwards.
So what I'm trying to do is say, instead of finding other ways to adjust the roll, let's look at those 3 variables, decide which ones are sacrosanct for all the other adjustments, and which ones are the one you adjust. After all, you could do the sorcerer route and only and ever adjust the number of dice.
Right.
You could have everything we just said, but the one single thing you ever adjust is the number of dice. Or you could keep all those other two, the first two things completely fixed and say, no, we are going to mess with target numbers. If you ask me, the former is way easier to learn and do than the latter. Working with flexible target numbers is kind of the devil when it comes to mechanics with these many variables potentially in them. Adjusting the target numbers is a little bit maddening. It's the least easy thing in play. Clipping out a die or adding a die is really cognitively easy in play. Switching the target number from 2 to 3 is cognitively more difficult. Even though any number of people will say, I'm good at math. The work is still the work.
Yeah.
Does that help or make any sense?
Yeah. I would say that of the three, the thing that is most important, I guess that's not really true. Of the things that I most want to have an effect, ethics is the thing that is most important because it's like, how much. So
you're actually going to keep the number of dice the same.
Well, that's what I was thinking, but honestly, the number of dice isn't really the important part. It's just that whether it's any one of those three, so long as ethics is the one that affects it primarily. But I don't know. Mm-hmm. So as written presently, yes, number of dice would seem to be the one that's the most important because it's the one.
Now, this is going to be a little weird and maybe counterintuitive. Are you sure you have assigned those three variables to their proper spots?
No.
No, me neither. Yeah. Just to spitball, you could have the ethics could actually be die size.
Right.
Which is very, very significant, by the way.
Yeah.
But if you're using the +1 method for the ties, then, interestingly enough, having a lot of dice actually could be very important. So it actually could suit very, very well to the circumstantial bonuses and the immediate tactics.
Right.
Matter of fact, the more I think about it, the more that sounds kind of coherent.
Yeah.
Now, it's a little counterintuitive. We're so used to saying, what's my X? That's the number of dice I roll.
Right.
That we're kind of breaking that a little bit.
Right.
But if the die size were the axis, that's sort of interesting. It's sort of a very intuitive axis, isn't it?
Yeah.
You actually just have your axes, and then you have a die size assigned at each end.
Right. I suppose it would need to have there would be a standard number of dice rolled.
Right.
And then maybe that would be varied based on superpowers. I'm not sure how to fit superpowers in it without fiddling with.
You have a base number of dice, and then you would add superpowers would be adding dice.
Right.
And other things would also add dice. You see, that way adding dice becomes something of a generic modifier.
Right.
So, and of which superpowers is a very common and enjoyable one, but it would be, but that's where you would get all your other bonuses and penalties too, is by changing the number of dice.
That's really interesting. Actually, I want to think about that.
Yeah, I don't know, but it strikes me as weirdly doable, and puts since your die size is always still based on your ethic, you're never losing it that way. You see what I mean? You're never losing your ethic or having it counterbalanced in any other way.
Right.
Or having it, obviated. You can have it counterbalanced by somebody rolling a huge handful, but your die size will never be obviated in any way. You choose that ethic, you're using that die size. Done.